Good afternoon. My name is Justin, and I'm the Technical Director and Information Officer. So just a brief introduction. Information Officer is an Atlassian partner, but we are also AWS and VMware partners. So that's why I'm talking about the cloud, but not really just about the cloud, but how to run, manage, or maintain your Atlassian tools. Okay, so my talk is a little different from the rest of the talk, which are more like how to use the tools or how to how to empower yourself with the tools. My talk is a little bit more skewed towards infrastructure and managing the tools itself. Now, so if you are using Atlassian tools right now, which I saw a lot of hands, okay, or you're considering to use the tools, my talk should be of a little bit of relevance to you. I know there's some questions on migration. Okay, that's what I'm going to be covering today. I've heard some people ask, and also people whom I've talked to at the booth. I know it's getting sleepy. All the fried food is sinking in. So let's just watch some video first before we move on to me talking.
This is Yenpo. He's a software developer, a magician at his job, but work never seems to go the way he wants it to, largely because of change requests from customers who don't know what they want. He's heard of tools that will help him, like Jira and Confluence. They're free to try and easy to get. He just needs an account on the cloud. Business grows and so do his cloud accounts. They save time and effort and are totally worth it. Not that he's seen the bills. He just uses the company credit card. This is Justin, Yenpo's boss. He knows Yenpo's a whiz at his work, but he's worried about all the other computer whizzes out to steal his best guy's progress. So he comes up with a new corporate policy. Everything's been working fine, and he's got no time to deal with this corporate policy stuff. Now that the company's grown, his hands are full with more change requests than ever. It's important meeting day. Yenpo proudly shows them the team's progress. In the next 48 hours, Yenpo struggles to migrate data off the cloud. Relying on the cloud before, Yenpo hasn't been caring for his own server much. It needs upgrades and security patches, and everything is slowing down. Information Officer provides an end-to-end solution. We don't just offer a product, but help your team manage and collaborate during the entire software lifecycle. We deal with finicky upgrades and migrations from cloud to server or server to cloud, and keep your stuff running with proven Amazon Web Services and Atlassian Data Center Editions 24/7. We've got a global team that's fully equipped to help you with all your IT infrastructure needs and evolving security policies. Growing your systems as the company grows.
Okay, so that's a great commercial break for you guys. So I've been writing code for more than 10 years, since early 2000s, and I kind of understand how developers feel. Developers, they really care about the code that they write because that's their code, right? Their app, their baby. But sometimes they may trivialize the importance or significance of the tools that they use. And the thing about the tools that they use is that usually the developers get to choose because they know the tools better than their bosses. So I want to just share a true story. This is a team of developers that I met at a casual event. Okay, so they weren't our customers, just some friends. And I found out they were using Jira. And as an Atlassian partner, I'm like, oh, awesome, you're using Jira, right? Is it great? And it turns out they were not so happy. Now, this is what happened. They had a Dell server. It's not as crappy as the one that Yenpo was using. That's a 1990s Sun Microsystem thing. But it's a dev server in the office. And they ran Jira on it. Now, this server is a dev box, right? So they bought it on the budget. They had no backup power supply. It has no data backup. It's backing up to a local disk, which is not a backup, by the way. And the worst part is that they ran it on this Celeron processor. Now, if you guys know your Intel CPU range, Celeron is like the most entry CPU you can buy on a server. If you want to go any cheaper than Celeron, is an Atom processor, which is meant for mobile devices. So they had a Celeron dev box, and they ran Jira on it. And because it's a dev box, they're running a ton of stuff. They only put 2 gigs of RAM on that server. So they gave the Jira VM 2 gigs because they had like database and their containers and all that. And the thing was slow, right? They feel burdened by it, and they stopped using it. They literally like kind of stopped putting tickets in the system. So then I asked them this question. I said, why it's not on a production grade server? And they said, it's just a ticketing system. Now, if you think about it, Jira is not just a ticketing system. Let's say you're a logistics company and you're using SAP. Is SAP just operational? It's just a system to manage your, let's say, invoices or your tasks. Jira is as good as any operational tool. Okay? And if your business is in software development or it depends largely on it, now Jira is as important as any other production system that you run, be it customer facing or not. And it is not a trivial task to maintain and keep Jira running. It is a big part of our business, information officer, to help customers ensure that Jira as a tool or Confluence or Bitbucket work for them. Now, the initial bit of my talk will be less technical. Hopefully, there are people who need to understand more about the products that Atlassian offers, so I need to cover the groundwork for those who are not familiar. And then later on, it's going to get a little technical. It's actually meant for people who are more inclined, technically inclined. Anybody here are developers? Developers? Okay. System engineers? Okay. Okay, so those are the target audience for the later part. So just going to cover quickly what is cloud good for. Most of you should know this. It's good for quick setup, no need to buy hardware, no have to buy any network equipment. You just get starting and running. Good for small teams that don't have resources to deal with those kind of things like buying hardware, running networks. And there's no procurement process. You just go get a credit card and buy. It's definitely a variable cost. That's what people talk about cloud. You don't have to pay up front. But there's one extra theme that we noticed for people who are using the cloud, and that is people who actually want to break out from the main organization. I don't know if any of you do that, but if you want to bypass internal IT, you sneak onto the cloud. Okay. So anyway, those are the things that we have seen, what cloud is good for, and I guess a lot of you know. So if you are small team, you're a lean and efficient team, which you should be anyway, otherwise you're in a wrong event, we encourage you to sign up on the cloud to get started. It is $10 for 10 users, so it's $1 a user a month. This is really, really cheap. Think about what you can do with $1 these days. Now, I guess by now, most people here will understand that the cloud is just really somebody else's computer. But it's important to bear this in mind, though, because it changes how you think about the data that you put in it. Imagine your laptop doesn't belong to you. What will you do with the data in your laptop? Will you put some things there? Maybe will you think about how you manage those data? You will. So there's definitely some downsides to the cloud. Trying to get a thumbs down here. So as companies grow, okay, we often see a need to integrate with enterprise apps. And really the most common app that we integrate with is Microsoft Active Directory. Almost 90% of the first integration we do is with AD. And that's because obviously big companies, there's no way to manage users in different systems separately. Okay? Atlassian Cloud, supposedly, Scott, I'm not sure. Active Directory integration is coming soon. I don't know when. Hopefully that will be soon enough. And of course, the next in line, we see a lot of integrations with like ERP systems and accounting systems where people want to like pull cost information into Jira, or then put Jira information like hours, work logs into the accounting system for billing purposes. Those are the kind of integrations they see. That's quite often. Continuous upgrades. These are good and bad. Okay, Atlassian Cloud runs, as you have heard earlier in the day, Scott's presentation, it runs really a lot of new things, latest and greatest version, and you get a lot of new features on the cloud. Now, but however, In large organizations where you have change management process, sometimes large companies, they want any upgrades or changes to be tested. And that's because sometimes even a small UI change will require retraining because sometimes the end users are not technical, like in the call center. And of course, big companies, they have security policies and like you need data to be securely erased and all that the cloud cannot conform to. So I'm just curious if there's anybody here from the government, Ministry of, only one. Okay, so when I say IM8, you ever heard of that? They really get very excited when I say that. It's actually the government, it's kind of like a policy thing that the government has for security. And cloud is one of the things that they have to deal with. So I'm talking a little bit more about Atlassian Cloud. The add-on support on the cloud is not as exhaustive as on the server. I'll talk more about that later. That's because the add-on mechanism on the cloud is slightly different. They're using something called Atlassian Connect. It's different from the server mechanism. And there's also limits. I was talking to somebody just now, and they wanted to move from server to cloud. 2,000 users is the limit on the cloud, so please bear that in mind if you're trying to do that. There's also other limits like storage limits. Maximum you can have like 100 gigs of data in Jira or something like that. And of course, lack of customizability is a kind of well-known thing about cloud that you can't really customize much because they have to maintain the environment across many users. They can't let you fiddle around with settings. And so fortunately, there are options. There's server edition and the data center edition. So there's 3 offerings: cloud, server, data center. Now these 2 editions are what they call on-premise. That means you have to download and install them on your own server, or you can find a hosting partner to help you with. Quickly go through some benefits. So like I said, the cloud is a very new offering by Atlassian. It's been around a couple of years, but the server offering has been around for as long as Atlassian has been around, or as long as I remember. Back then, it's only just called Jira, and that was it. Jira is installed on the server. There's no cloud, no data center, none of that. And because of that, there were add-ons from the beginning. Like people were building add-ons for Jira and Confluence, all that. And as a big marketplace, or we call it ecosystem of add-ons. And only recently that they had cloud, so the add-on vendors are slowly extending the add-ons to the cloud. Now, as a benefit of the large ecosystem on the server and data center editions, there's actually a lot of integration capabilities that you can get. Okay, of course, like I said, out of the box, Active Directory is one of them. There's also things like direct database access if you need them. We do have customers who want to report off things like crystal reports, and they connect directly to the database. Might not be ideal, but sometimes tools like that are what the management uses, and we can't just move away from tools like that. And of course, the last one is that you can buy as many licenses as you want. The limit is what your server can take. So basically, all the products, almost all the products that Atlassian have is available on the server edition, with the exception of some cloud-only companies that they acquired recently. Okay, and data center is also a relatively new, not super new, but relatively new product. They started off with only Jira and Confluence, and then they slowly extended to the rest of the product range. Okay, I got some time. I want to highlight HipChat here. If you go to the Atlassian site and try to download HipChat, I don't know now, but a couple of months ago it was true. You can still find 2 versions to download. If you like say you try to download software, Jira software on data center and cloud, data center and server, they are the same installer, okay? But HipChat, they used to be 2 different installers. Don't download the server one. That's no longer supported. Download the data center one, and then when you buy a license for server, anything that's under 3,000 users, you install on the data center copy that you install. So you download the data center version and install a server license. Okay, that's how it is now. Now, so what's the difference between these two? Okay, the only technical difference is the active clustering. And all other basic features of products are essentially the same. Okay, but to get the data center edition going, you actually need these components. And they can be quite complicated to deal with. here's a typical data center architecture diagram. You can see in here that the load balancer, the database, and the file system, these are the components that I mentioned earlier are in this diagram. Usually when you go to architecture like that, people want two things, right? The first thing is scale. You want to be able to scale horizontally. If you have only one server, what you have to do is to add more RAM, add more CPU, and you scale what they call upwards, vertically. So in a cluster, you typically add a new node, and you imagine if there's 100 nodes here. Now the challenge here is that you have to then scale this stuff, because when you have 100 nodes here, these will get overloaded. Now the second thing that people want from a cluster is high availability. So that means if one node goes down, there's another node to take over. And usually you hear terms like N+1. Well, what does N+1 mean? It means that it can withstand a one node failure. So the thing about high availability is that sometimes people forget to plan spare capacity. So you can imagine if you have two servers, okay, and they're serving 1,000 users, for example. It's on the brim, and one server goes down. Now, yeah, you may have another server available, but it cannot take the load of that 1,000 users. Then it's as good as no high availability. Designing HA, or high availability, is not trivial. There's a lot of things to consider, and like I said, this is a simplified diagram. A lot of things are not shown here. So for example, if any of you here may be aware, if you have done any clustered database, that by itself is a domain knowledge. If you've done any things like EMC storage, that by itself is a special domain knowledge. Same thing, load balancer. I used to deal with Citrix NetScaler. That is also by itself a domain knowledge. And what about these blue lines? What are the blue lines? They are the network connections to your servers, right? These connections are going through what? Going through like a switch. And then the switch by itself and the routers, they are also a different area of knowledge. So designing HA is really not trivial. And I want to say that pay attention here. The only component that Atlassian provides for data center is the application server that's running in the nodes. All the other things here is on you. Okay, so the true full high availability is a lot of engineering. And that's something we also help our customers with, especially when you're working within a budget. Okay? Nothing is free. There's one little thing I want to talk about here is, I think some of you may be thinking about this, geo-clustering support. What is geo-clustering? It means you can run nodes across different geographical regions. Now, there's no official geo-clustering support. That's because the nodes, they need low latency to talk to each other, and also to the database and the file system and all that. But in our opinion, in some tests, we have found that it's possible to run them across data centers as long as the data centers are close enough. Like in Singapore, east and west, I don't think you get more than like 10 milliseconds. So it's okay to do that. Or in AWS, in the same region, like in Singapore or Tokyo, it's okay to do that. So does everybody here know what these terms RPO and RTO means? Anybody heard of that? RPO, RTO?
Recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives.
Yep, great. So what this means is that RPO, RTO, recovery time and recovery point objectives, they describe the tolerances for things like high availability or your backups or your disaster recovery. And when you say RPO, recovery point, it means when I recover a service, how old is the data when I recover? Okay? And recovery time is how quickly I can recover a service. So let's just say I have a recovery point of 8 hours and a recovery time of 1 hour. It means that I can get my service back up in 1 hour, but the server may have a data that's 8 hours old. I lose 8 hours of data. And what we do is we realize that, of course, not all organizations want a big infrastructure like this, or they don't need it. So they have budgets. They have things that they need to work within, and we discuss with them. We understand their RPO, RTO tolerances and their budgets, and we help them design what we think is suitable for their organization. And so what if you just need something simple? All this is too much for you. Well, the good news is we have several solutions that we have kind of developed, and I'll share with you a case study in a minute, and how we do that. And I think some of you may be interested because you are running your own servers. I've spoken to a few. So I just quickly talk about licensing. I'm not going to talk about price. Like Sim said, price is all transparent online. You can go check it out. But this is important. Now, server is sold as a perpetual license. That means when you buy it for the first year, you also get support, maintenance from Atlassian. You get upgrades, and you can call them, not call them, email them for help. And then if you want to continue the support, you pay half the price every other year. Now, data center is different. It's a subscription-based license. That means you have to pay the same price every year. And if you stop subscribing, then you have some limitations imposed on the product. Okay? There's also difference in the tiers. Now, server, obviously, you start small at 10, and it kind of like goes exponentially from there. If you go to data center, it's more linear, but it starts at 500. Then it goes like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and then it goes to 10,000. You'll be 5,000 increments till 50,000. So this is the end of my product-y bits on my slides. It's great that I actually gone through it pretty quickly. I'm going to get a bit more technical from here. Okay, what I'll do here is I'm sure a few of you are interested. I'm going to touch on the high-level process steps to migrate from server to cloud or cloud to server. And I'm going to only be able to cover Jira and Confluence. I can't cover every product because it's really complicated. So going from server to cloud, the first thing you have to do is read the docs. Okay? There's nothing else that you should do for any migration. You don't do anything before you read the docs. Now, the reason why you have to read the docs for at least Atlassian's products is because things are changing all the time. What I tell you now can be obsolete next week. There are a lot of things in the docs, and they also cover some known issues and bugs that you may need to be aware of. And then, backup. Now, I'm talking server to cloud, right? So you're running your own server. I hope you have a backup, okay? And if you don't, please do a backup. And I'm talking about system backup. So if you're running something like VMware, you're going to do a snapshot, that's okay. If you have a more advanced backup tool, you can use that. If you don't have, this backup I'm talking about is like do a dump of the database and copy all the files out in the data directory. This is the way to back it up. There's another backup I'll talk about in a bit. That's called an XML backup. That is not a production-grade backup. Don't use that as a daily backup. Now, the next part is to upgrade. And there's a reason why I say backup, because you have to upgrade. And when you upgrade, it depends on how old your version is from the current. Now, like I said, the cloud's always running the latest version. And if you want to migrate from server to cloud, you have to bring your server to the same version as the cloud before you can migrate. There's no migration that can happen without being on the same version. So you have to upgrade. And sometimes you have to do intermediate upgrades to get to the version that you want. And if you don't back up and you upgrade, something goes wrong, you can't go back. Okay? So definitely make sure you back up. And then after you backed up, you've upgraded, everything is nice, you have the version that you want, you make this is what I call the XML backup. And this backup is the one that you go log into your Jira or Confluence, you go to the top settings, there's a menu somewhere in there. They're a little bit different, both products, but it's in there, there's a backup. You click on that, what it does is it generates a huge zip file. And this zip file contains XML files in there. The XML file is basically the contents of your database. And then it also zips up all the attachments. The attachments are not in the database, they're on the disk. Okay? So it zips up everything, big zip file, and then it gives you a backup. So imagine if you have a server that's been running for a long time and a lot of users, this can be a huge file. Okay? And you have to download that file. Sometimes we find it's not possible to download it off HTTP. We have to go copy it out using like SCP or something else. Then you restore that backup on the cloud. And once again, if you're a software developer here, you know that form posts, you can't form posts 2 gigs. Okay? No way, there's a limit. So please read the docs. There's a lot of things on the docs that will tell you what the limits are. And after that, you set up the users and permissions. Now, why you have to do this? The users are migrated, but the cloud has a different user management from your server. So you do have to read the docs and find out what are the specifics you have to deal with when you move from server to cloud. And then set up those permissions and access. And finally, you have to configure your add-ons, if any, if you need to deal with that. Now, here are some things to note. Okay? This is really important. You need to find every add-on that you have right now, and to make sure that the vendor that built the add-on has the support for this migration path. Now, what I mean by migration path is that they allow you to go in this direction. It's not just there's the same add-on on the cloud. No, they may be the same add-on, but if they don't allow the migration like that, you're going to lose your data. So make sure every add-on has the migration path. The next thing you have to do is if you have Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, you have configured them to link, right? You can tag Jira tickets in your Confluence or link your Confluence articles in your Jira. So when you move from server to cloud, the URL changes. You have to reconfigure all your application links. And sometimes you have to go and search and replace all the URLs in your, say, Confluence. And like I said, there are limits. This is a documented limit, but there are other limits that you may have to read in the docs. This is one of them, and it's an uncompressed limit. So if you unzip that file, that backup that you did, and it's more than 200 meg, you can't put it back in. And what you have to do is then you have to do it space by space in Confluence. Okay. This is a really interesting topic that I want to talk about. A little bit, not about Atlassian, but in general. I know there are software developers here. Are there any iOS developers? iOS? No? Java? Some. Okay. So anyhow, if you ever written apps in iOS and you use the NSDate object, okay, developers, if you understand what I'm talking about, NSDate object, if you try to get the time, the hour, right, the day, the month, the year from NSDate, you cannot. There's no such method or function in that class. Why is that so? Now, date and time is a really complicated thing. And here in Singapore, we may not realize because we don't have time zones. But if you go to a different country, right, they have 4 seasons. There's daylight savings. So even sitting at your desk, the time changes, the time zone changes. So time zone is a really complicated thing to deal with. And in iOS, in Java, which a long time ago, Java allowed you to pull date and time off the date class. But in I think JDK 1.1, you have to do this. You have to take the date object and put it into a calendar object. And then from the calendar object, you can query your month, your day, your year from there. And it's so complicated because the calendar object, there's different calendar. We are using, or most of the world is using the Gregorian calendar, right? That's what we're using. There's lunar calendar, there's a ton of calendars out there. So that's why you have to apply the calendar object to your date to retrieve this information. And so if you are writing software or doing anything at all, I always advise people to run servers in UTC, always. Okay? Don't run it in your local time zone. When you configure and install UTC, and that's why the Atlassian Cloud's also running their stuff in UTC. It's because of this time zone thing. They have to deal with all this. And we can't always enforce on developers to make sure that they deal with time correctly. Now, if you're a developer, okay, how many MySQL users here? MySQL. Come on, man. What are you guys using? PostgreSQL? Now, if you use MySQL, you know that MySQL actually has, you use like now, NOW, right, to get time. Now, there's other functions in MySQL where you can get times in like local time. And so this is a question. You don't have to answer me now. You go find out yourself. If you use now, what does MySQL return you? Now, what about PostgreSQL? If you use the same function now, what does it return you? PostgreSQL actually is being nice. They actually give you the time zone. MySQL does not. And if you store the time in MySQL there's 2 data types in MySQL. There's date time and there's timestamp. Now, go read up. Which one deals with time zone, which does not? Okay? You find out the difference. And people don't know. I'm sure a lot of people don't know. And when they do that, and that's the thing, we can't train developers to be nice. The only thing that we can do is make sure everything runs UTC. So, long story, make sure you run UTC, and if you're migrating to the cloud, set your server time to UTC before you export. Because the XML file, when you export, the dates don't have time zone. Okay? You set it to UTC and import into the cloud, then you'll be all good. The problem with not doing this is you will not realize this. You know why? When you migrate to the cloud and you say, oh, I got 2,000 tickets all migrated. And then 2 weeks later, you realize, did I write this comment at 4:30 a.m.? No, because the time zone has changed. Okay? Going from cloud to server, same thing, read the docs. Okay, now because you're going from the cloud to the server, you have to install the latest. I put latest in the bracket. Same thing, you go read the docs and find out which version to install. Then now, because it's on the server, you have to deal with the licenses. You have to buy also your add-on license. You can use the evals if you want. And then you make a backup. Same thing on the cloud. You make this backup. It's a huge zip file. You download it. You restore it. And then you have to set up the users again. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then you have to deal with your add-ons. Okay? I've talked about the time zone. I've talked about the add-ons. Make sure it's supported, that migration path. Now, of course, like Scott mentioned earlier, there's definitely feature loss from the cloud. Atlassian puts the latest and greatest and a bunch of preview features on the cloud. So that's one thing you have to deal with. And if your users are reliant on that feature, then you will have feature loss. Sometimes, now going to the cloud, some people may understand, if it's too big, I can't restore. But going to the server, we have had the same problem as well. That's because, if you know, Atlassian products are written in Java, and Java JVM has a memory setting. You can encounter like out-of-memory situations. Here's the part about logging in. Now, when you go from cloud to the server, now you need a sysadmin account on your server. So fortunately for Jira, they give you a default sysadmin account. You can log in, but please change your password. For Confluence, you have to do a recovery procedure. That means that what you have to do is you shut down Confluence, and then you start it up with a little parameter that says recovery or something like that. Then you go in there and change your password, and then you shut it down again, and then now you restart it without that parameter. Then you can log in. And this last one is important because I realize a lot of people on the cloud, they're actually using Google for their authentication. There's no support for Google on the server yet. So when you move from the cloud to the server, you're going to lose your Google authentication capabilities. So after this, you may realize that it's really very troublesome to do a migration. So if you really want to know more, do speak with a Singapore partner. So before I continue with a case study, I'm going to show you another video of a startup that we have worked closely with. We not only help them with their Atlassian tools, we also deal with their production infrastructure. So anybody here from the Philippines? Okay, good. So one. This might interest you because this startup, they actually deal with people in the Philippines.
I'm Jonathan Chua, I'm the CEO of Beam & Go. At Beam & Go, we have a payment and e-commerce marketplace for migrant workers. And our first demographics of users is overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs. So what we're trying to do as a company is to empower overseas Filipino workers. Because of the current situation, the way it works is that Filipino workers will send money back to their family, and it's in the form of cash. Now the biggest problem with that is they don't know what happens to the money once they're beneficiaries or once their family gets the money. So what we do is we have a platform, and it's an e-commerce platform where they can dictate how their money is spent by their family. So they could say, I want the money to be spent for groceries, or I want it to be spent on bill payments, or medicine, or healthcare. And Beam & Go has been featured in Bloomberg and CNN Philippines. Last year we were in the Disrupt 100, and we were in the top 5 of the World Cup startup competition. And it's not just accolades. In 2016 we had an 800% revenue growth. In 2017 we're about 300% up, and this year we're projected to be about 500% up. Imagine having a software company or an online company where your customers don't have credit cards. What we had to do is we had to work with remittance companies, we had to work with banks, agent networks, digital wallets, to integrate with them so our customers can make payments over the counter or through their cell phone. Because of the complexity of that software, we had to use state-of-the-art or best-of-breed tools that are provided by Atlassian. Because if we didn't use those tools, what would happen? It would be total chaos. We are software developers. That's all we really want to do is build great products and to continue to build products with a lot of features, and we don't want to have to worry about the administration of these tools. And so what we do is we've turned to information officer. So information officer has set up the tools, they administer the tools, and they configure the tools for us. Now, I've been working with information officer for the past 15 years. What impresses me about them the most is that whatever they promise, they deliver. And whenever the chips are down, I could always depend on them to be there. And that's just the beginning. We have major plans to touch and improve the lives of migrant workers all over the world. With Information Officer as our partner, and the use of Atlassian tools, we're going to create the blueprint, the software, and the partnerships so that we can go into Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and the rest of the world.
It's really interesting to see how Beam and Go actually tackle the challenges of remittance from what is basically an unbanked customer pool. And these people, their target customers are actually like your domestic helpers here in Singapore. And the domestic helpers here, they don't have bank accounts, they don't have credit cards, and how they send money is they usually do like cash remittance through things like Western Union, right? And the thing about cash is that when the cash goes to the receiving end, it's actually subject to abuse. They don't know what happens to the money. So they want to make sure that it gets used to pay bills and used to get paid pay education. And what Beam and Go did was that they actually let the people here buy credits for services like telco bills or grocery stores, and then so that the receivers can then use them at those places to spend the money. Now think about the integration they have to do with this, because then the receiving side, the people may not have smartphones either. They're not like Singapore. We're all really up to date with technology. So they don't have smartphones. They really have to integrate with the shops, the merchants, they call it, on the ground to get this thing to work. And here they also have to integrate with the remittance companies to be able to receive the payment. So without the help of Atlassian tools, they wouldn't have been able to do it. So we love working with startups. Startups really, they are dynamic, they are receptive to new ideas, and they adapt quickly to changes. And so I'm going to share with you a case study of another startup that we helped migrate. And this is a growing startup. It's actually a Malaysian-based startup. I'm not going to tell you who, but maybe you all can guess. Most of you should be using their products by now. And they have a HQ in Singapore, and they were growing really rapidly. And Confluence was part of the onboarding process. So basically, they had like HR or whatever stuff in there. And because they're growing so quickly, they reached the 2,000 U limit on the cloud. And they didn't know about this limit until they hit it, right? And then so because they're growing so quickly, initially what they did was they deleted users, trying to put new users in the system. But because they were hiring so many hundreds of people a month, they can't do this forever. They came to us. We had a very tight timeline to move. We were giving about 1 month. And on top of that, they had some latency and outages that they experienced, maybe because they had just so many users there. So what happens is like we help them move from Atlassian Cloud to their own data center AWS environment. And you can look at this diagram here. It looks similar to like the data center architecture, but this is not a data center deployment. What we did was we designed what we call Permanent Data Center Edition. It's actually active-passive HA. And the thing about data center is a bit technical here, is that to be able to get that clustering, all right, if you know Jira and Confluence, all these tools well, they rely a lot on caching and indexing. And so to be able to do a cluster like that, Data Center Edition by Atlassian actually does replication for the caches and indexes, and there's also like cluster locking and all that thing. So all that technology is in the Data Center Edition to make that happen. Now without that, there's no way you can run more than one at the same time. So by using the regular server version, you can only run one at a time. But what we did is you can't really see, I think, here is a Heartbeat in a Linux, a Heartbeat agent. And what the Heartbeat agent does is it does two things. It makes sure that there's only one copy running at a time. And the other thing it does is like it automates starting up the secondary when the primary goes down, when it doesn't detect the heartbeat from the primary. So obviously the limit here is the maximum capacity of a single node. But fortunately, we did some tests. We did some static load tests, and then later on when we really let the users hit the servers, it actually worked up to 2,000 users with a fairly modest EC2 instance, C4 large, I think. And then when they grew to 3,000 users, they actually scaled it to C4 X large, still working fine. Okay. And then what happened is that, okay, for this setup, we have done many different HADR solutions for our customers, but this is by far one of the best. And why I say it's the best because the RPO or RTO is close to 0, right? That's because all these central database, all the data is there. So when you fail over, you just bring this one up, and it's all there, right? And AWS actually makes it really easy to do this. It takes all the management away from you. Now, what happens if, like I said, the data center edition by Atlassian has all the index replication. So if an index is corrupted, you can, say, take one node down and let it rebuild before you bring it back into the cluster. But this is a standalone. So if there's an index corruption when it crashed, for example, then the rebuild of the index will take time, and then it will affect your RTO. Now, I want to especially mention here EFS. Does anybody here know what EFS is? EFS is a new offering by AWS. It's actually NFS file storage here. Prior to that, the only way to get this and also the data center edition going was that you have to install your own Linux server and then set up NFS and then have connect to that. But the thing is that you set up your own Linux server with NFS, then you have to deal with how to make this server highly available. Now EFS takes all that work away from you, so that's good news. And the thing about EFS is that Atlassian does not really officially say that they support EFS, except for maybe, I think, Confluence Data Center. But what we have tried and tested is we have successfully deployed EFS in this manner with 3,000 users, and it has been working fine. So we think that the benefits of not having to deal with like HA and all that outweighs any performance impact. The primary reason why Atlassian says EFS is not supported is because of latency, but I think that outweighs any performance impact from EFS. Now, right at the bottom here is a backup system. And like I said, I always emphasize on backups. Now, does everybody here know the difference between backup and DR or HA? There is a fundamental difference. Okay? If anybody ever ran SQL query like update or delete and forgot the where clause, then whatever you did affects the whole cluster in the database, right? So if you don't have a backup, you're dead. So that's why you need a backup. Now, here we designed the backup to run off the secondary server to reduce the load. And also, if you didn't pay attention, this infrastructure is running in US West. And the backup system is here in Singapore. And this is a design consideration when we built this for our customer. Why did we do this? I don't know if you remember 2009, there was an earthquake. And when the earthquake happened, Singapore basically went offline from the rest of the world. There's literally no internet. It's so slow. That's because the undersea cables that goes from Singapore to Tokyo to the US is called the APCN2. That cable had a break, and there was not enough bandwidth to carry all the traffic. And Singapore, basically, we consume a lot of content from across the world, right? Facebook, Google, YouTube. So imagine if this happens again, and it will happen, it's a natural disaster. Then what they can do is then they can restore from the backup system into a temporary server, run it first, and when everything comes back, they can then bring it back to the production system. So some roadblocks that we hit along the way, and this is because they really had a huge instance. We could not create a backup. And I was guessing it might be because it ran out of memory in Java. And so we had to contact Atlassian. Atlassian got an engineer to help us manually generate the backup, and they put it on a server, a URL outside of Confluence and Jira, and they download it. And then after we got all that, we could not restore the backup because there were some bugs in the backup that was causing the XML to be malformed. So once again, we had Atlassian help us. They initially hand-edited the XML file. And you can imagine this is a 2,000 user instance. Hand-editing XML file is very tedious. Even if you try to search and replace, it's a lot of work. So they had to hand-edit, and then eventually they fixed the bug, and then we retried the whole backup and restore. Okay, so the results was we were able to scale past 2,000 users, going to 3,000. They actually really grew to almost 3,000 within a year. And because of that, there was improved also management. They have improved visibility. They were able to monitor the server and trend its usage and see how the health of the server is doing over time. And with that, then they had better experience because then now they are more proactive instead of reactive to utilization, overload, and all that. And of course, they experience loss of features. One of the things that I really remember clearly was that they were using this add-on on the cloud for Markdown. Now, why would you put Markdown on Confluence? Confluence has a WYSIWYG editor, right? But they did. Somebody put Markdown in Confluence, and because the add-on was there, people were putting more Markdown in Confluence. And then when we moved off the cloud to the server, that add-on was not available. We had to install a different Markdown add-on, and because it's different, there's no way to migrate. What they had to do was manually copy and paste when they chanced upon a page with Markdown. So, well, I'm pretty quick. So before I end, you realize that's me. It's a budget production, so I had to do the video as a talent. And they decided to print my pictures everywhere. I'm not 自恋, okay? If you have seen SLA figures like this, now that's a very high number, right? 99.9%. Do you know what that means in hours and minutes of downtime? What's the acceptable limit for 99.9? It's actually 43 minutes. Now, if you had your internet or your email go down for 43 minutes, you know how it feels like, right? So what I want to say is, at the end of the day, SLA are just numbers. What is more important is that you have control over anything that affects your business. And with the control, there's better. You can better manage when things happen. Now, even if it's unplanned, you can also reduce the impact because you have control. So that brings me to the end of my talk. If you want to know more, please visit our website or speak with us at the booth outside, or you can email me. Thank you.